My name is Hannah Hogue, and I'm a program manager at the Alliance for Healthier South Carolina. I'll be serving as your moderator for today's website. Before we start, on behalf of the Alliance, I want to welcome you to today's funding webinar focused on helping nonprofit and community leaders navigate shifting funding landscapes and plan for sustainability. This session is designed to provide practical insights, tools, and strategies that support long-term fundraising and organizational resilience. Before we jump into the good stuff, I want to briefly share just a little bit about the Alliance for any of you who aren't familiar with us or the work that we do. So our vision is a South Carolina with optimal and equitable health outcomes for all. Our mission is to convene and connect diverse stakeholders to align and catalyze efforts to improve health and well-being for communities across South Carolina. Our work is really guided by three priority areas, which are health equity, community health improvement, and state health improvement. Now on to the even more fun stuff, the housekeeping. So just to help today's session run smoothly, a few quick notes. All participant microphones are muted. If you're not muted, please mute yourself to ensure sound quality. We encourage you to use the chat box to share questions and comments throughout the presentation. My colleagues, Tashina and Landon, are here to help us all manage the chat and make sure your questions are heard. We will be monitoring the chat and addressing questions during the Q&A portion at the end of the session as time allows. Please also note that today's webinar is being recorded and a recording will be shared with all registrants following the session. All right, and now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Marydale Hayes. Marydale is a nonprofit whisperer and executive wrangler who leads Stopgap Solutions, parachuting into messy middles to get stalled missions moving. She brings calm, clarity, and tactical genius to high-stakes, high-heart organizations. Her superpower, turning vision into action without burning out the people behind it. She builds solutions that last and leaders who are ready to run with them. So Marydale, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will now turn it over to you.
Yay, this is the oh, there we go. All right, this is the fun part where we figure out if the sharing's going to actually work and the screens are going to work. Like we didn't just 5-year pandemic try all of this stuff. Also, that's what happens when you ask ChatGPT to write your biography, which I 10 out of 10 recommend because it's hard to talk about yourself, but ChatGPT does a great job of talking about you. Okay, so hopefully we are all here to talk about money, which is a thing that for many years our parents told us was tacky and impolite. But we are going to spend the next hour talking about different strategies to bring revenue into our organizations and taking the time and making space to acknowledge that that doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen on its own. It requires strategy, it requires money, and it requires investment on the part of the organization. Those are my people, and they're the reason why this work is important to me. I've done a bunch of certificates and things in the nonprofit space trying to be better at this work. I think we're all constantly pursuing professional education, but my why is building a world that they have all of the opportunities that they desire. And so I get to work with people like you in making that happen. And so I just want to invite you to drop in the chat your name, the organization you represent today, and why are you spending your precious limited time and energy here instead of anywhere else? Because time is a finite resource. We don't get more of it. We can't invent more of it. We can only control how we spend it. So I think a lot of us hear this narrative about fundraising, like if people just knew about our work, they would want to donate to us. We could just diversify our funding. Everything would be stable. It's our development person. If they were better, we would have all the money. Or it's our board. If our board was better, we would have all the money. But the truth is that fundraising is a team sport. It takes money to make money, and it takes a lot of time and runway to build and grow a successful development program. We tend to talk a big game about fundraising, but most of that is not backed up by action. And we see that in the results. So that leaves us as a sector highly dependent on federal grants and other restricted dollars, and we're underinvested typically in the operations that would help us scale our work and grow ways that would actually generate the revenue that we need to execute our mission. We tend to cut off mission because of lack of revenue. And when we can get really bold about what that vision is and what it's going to actually cost to succeed, it helps us to go boldly into that future. But without that vision, we remain stuck clopping coconuts together and pretending that they're horses. And continuing to have to explain what is overhead and why an overhead percentage has nothing to do with how successful we are, how good at our work we are, and is a completely irrelevant measure of an organization's value. So what do you need to know to be good at fundraising? You've got to start, like I was just saying, about knowing the total amount of what your program cost would be if you were building your dream program. To really successfully execute your mission, what would that cost? Is it even possible for your program to make revenue to offset some of that cost? If not, how much fundraising revenue do you need? Can you get reasonably? And how much is it going to cost to make that money? This is where we tend to lose our grip on reality, is talking about the cost of fundraising, because we end up burdening our development staff and our CEOs with paying for coffee with donors out of their own pockets, paying to go to lunches on their own, and incurring various other expenses. And so organizations who don't have a realistic picture of what it costs to raise money aren't able to make a realistic determination of what it's going to cost to really bring that revenue in. All of that happens because we come at this typically from a scarcity mindset, and we get wound up in the thought of the word fundraising. But really, fundraising is just the external focus of the purpose of our work and the purpose of our organization. And so when we center our fundraising around the purpose of why we exist and our values, it comes across as more authentic and more integrated into the whole of the organization, instead of some gross side hustle, a distraction, something that's ugly that you have to do, but that's bad. And we don't want that to be the way an organization approaches fundraising, because it's never going to work or succeed with that. The other significant burden we tend to face with fundraising is that a lot of us confuse fundraising with awareness. Awareness doesn't change anything. I am aware that the sky is blue. Literally nothing changed. I am aware that Cheerios are the world's most delicious cereal. Probably didn't change your mind. You probably already knew that Cheerios were great. There are so many things that we're aware of, but they don't invite us to create an impact. They don't invite us to take an action. Awareness is passive. An awareness campaign, there's a brilliant article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and it's probably like 20 years old now, and it's called Stop Raising Awareness. And it talks about the actual harm that can happen when we have successful awareness campaigns that don't invite people to take action. So we have to be really intentional and thoughtful when we're educating people about the work that we're leading, that it comes with a way for them, an invitation for them to actively be part of doing that work and not just knowing about that work. And we think we have to reframe fundraising too, so that it's not thinking about us going out and evangelizing the world with our mission. It's about inviting people in and inviting people to take ownership of the part that they can play in the work that we're doing. And that takes us to the number one truism that all fundraisers know. If you ask for money, you are going to get advice. And if you ask for advice, you are going to get money. So you've got to be thinking, when you're engaging with your donors, whether it's as a group or individuals, how are you engaging them and providing their expertise and allowing them to impact your organization and the work that's taking place? They want to feel like they belong to it and that they have the ability to do more than just drop a check. They want to be part of making a difference and seeing their values out in the world. And that gets to people always remembering how you've made them feel and how welcome they felt when they came in to an organization. We want people, just like we want our clients or the communities we serve, to feel that sense of belonging, to feel like this is the place where they are welcome, that they are valuable, that they are appreciated, and that they are significant. A lot of that starts with how you talk to people in general. And so you've got 5 kind of simple narratives, but they all end up telling a different story. So saying we gave 5 scholarships, cool. I don't know what that means. Your support helps us to invest in 5 leaders, a little bit more insightful. The longer story helps us show the impact of organizations across the state when they, from the start to the finish, and why a donor may want to connect with the emotion behind the work that's happening so that they can invest directly there. The biggest problem that most organizations face when they approach fundraising is they're constantly focusing on bringing in new donors instead of keeping the donors that they've got. And they think about donors as the singular group of people who write checks instead of thinking inclusively about everyone as a potential donor, whether they are someone who gives, whether they're a board member, a volunteer, and we even need to create opportunities for our program participants to contribute to our organizations. It's important that that opportunity to invest and participate is open to all. Obviously, we don't want to harass people who we know don't have the expendable funds to make major gifts. That would be silly and it would make everyone feel bad. But in most of the work that I've done, people have wanted, when they've benefited from a program, they've wanted to give back to it in some capacity. And it's our obligation to create those pathways so that anyone who wants to can engage in a meaningful way with the work that's happening, because that's how we create the change that we want to see in the world. We can't do it by ourselves. We can't do it with just our board. We've got to have a groundswell of people coming together and saying that this thing is so important that we're going to use our voice and our time and our money to move it forward. Retention is not hard, and it's very frustrating to me. I tend to make a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, I tend to make a lot of random donations, and probably only about 70% of the time do I get a prompt and personal thank you. And I'm not out making major crazy gifts, but if I give to an organization, I at least expect to get a tax letter back within a week. And if I give more than $50, I expect to get a handwritten thank you note. Now, it's not fair to say expect, but it means a lot to me to receive that acknowledgement of my gift, because I want to know that, one, you know that I did it, but also that it matters enough for you to take some time out of your day to acknowledge my investment. You want to reach people with multiple touch points in the way that they want to receive messaging, which again is a lot of work. And we're going through this kind of obvious and well-known setup of Fundraising 101. And most of you probably know all of this or have heard it 5 times before. I don't think that any of this is rocket science. But I think it's always good to go back to those basics so that we can think about what it actually takes to run a successful fundraising program. The way that you raise that money evolves over the state of your organization. And so we're going to spend the rest of our time giving you space to think about where your organization stands, what capacity you're willing to invest, and then some different structures to think about generating revenue and getting really clear about making that decision with intent and with integrity instead of blindly committing and not having a whole lot to back it up. So when we have new organizations, they're typically really high on vision, but they don't have a lot of operational backbone to carry them through. Their program's not fully developed. As programs develop into their adolescence, their programs get bigger and they have more relationships. So they continue to grow as those relationships accelerate, and they've got this exciting vision to sell. And when you hit maturity, you've added in that management piece where you're getting pretty good at generating financial reports, getting that annual report out on time, all of those activities that say we are rocking and rolling are happening in maturity. As you move into midlife, typically the vision starts to go down a bit. Maybe the programs get a little bit stagnant, but you've got these established relationships and these great management systems that keep things rocking and rolling. And then as things go further down the cliff, every little piece starts to diminish until you're at the end stage where nothing is really strong. Your relationships have aged out, your vision's not sharp, your program's out of date, and even your management is getting weak. The good news is that at any stage of this organizational life cycle, you can choose to jump off. You can choose to reinvigorate your vision. You can choose to recognize that your relationships need a fresh investment of time and energy, or that your program needs to be reimagined. It's really difficult, but also easy to make those commitments to change how you're living in your organizational life cycle. But the reality of that is that the way you fundraise also changes with your organizational life cycle. So when an organization is young and in a young stage, typically you don't have much of a budget and your money's coming from a small number of true believers who are excited and have a personal relationship with the person leading the effort. As those programs increase, with relationships, you start to have more and usually bigger donors. And as your program gets strong and your management gets strong, that's typically when you start exploring corporate and foundation grants. And when you're in that really mature stage and even into the midlife stage, that's typically when you're talking about government grants too, because the operational requirements are so complex. You've got to have the management in place to successfully administer them. Where organizations sometimes make a mistake is in not being honest about their spot in their organizational life cycle and the impact that that's going to have on their ability to generate revenue. It goes back to being really conscious and intentional about knowing where you are in the life cycle and knowing where you want to be and what the cost will be to get you there. So if you find yourself relying on the same base of donors, which is great. We want to retain donors. It's the most expensive place where nonprofits lose money is in not retaining the donors who have already expressed interest and already overcome the hurdle of making a first gift. But if you decide, oh, we need to grow our program, we need to grow our investors, you're going to have to make some investments in getting new relationships, and it can't be at the expense of keeping the ones you've already established. So with that, it's always good to have a little capacity check. And so I would encourage you to take a moment to think about in your organization, who is doing the work of generating revenue and how many hours a week do they actually have to put into that? Do we actually have expertise in-house? If you want, a lot of times I'll go into an organization in a consulting gig and they'll say, and we're about to start a planned giving program, but they just have a brochure. They don't actually understand what a donor advised fund is, or how mandatory distributions work and how to accept a stock gift. So making sure you've got the expertise in-house to actually process and manage gifts, whether you're talking about whether it's the process to accept $20 in cash or $20,000 through a stock transfer. Are our leaders willing to do the uncomfortable parts of fundraising? Because there are uncomfortable parts of fundraising. Asking people for money can be difficult. Sometimes our donors are not always the best behaved, or they can have large personalities. Are our leaders willing to meet with those people and do the relationship part, even when it's not fun for the person in that position? And then at the end, you've really got to get practical about, are we willing to spend money to make money? Because it will cost you money to raise money. It's either going to cost you in staff time and benefits, it's going to cost you in technology, making sure that you can process and accept gifts safely. It's going to cost you in data management and the time to do data management, so you're keeping up with your gifts and making sure they're being acknowledged appropriately. And it's going to cost you in numerous other ways. And so being really honest about what that cost is going to be, the cost of success. So we see a lot of nonprofits make some investment in fundraising, and they're making half the investment they need and they're expecting the full result. And that's just not the way life and business work out. You're going to get the investment that you make at the proportional scale. Now, it's not always a direct linear progression. At some points, you face a cost juncture where the cost of fundraising is going to increase dramatically. If you recognize that your CEO and your development staff person cannot manage any additional relationships, it's a dramatic cost to add in an additional staff person. But there's also a cost of not adding in that staff person. And that's going to be the cost of being stagnant and not being able to increase the number of donors that your organization can successfully engage with. And then finally, we get to market fit. And I feel like we don't want to say sometimes that donors just aren't going to give to things, or we want to over rely on donors only want to give to sick kids and sick puppies. But we have to get honest about what makes our community want to buy or fund this. And who from our community wants to buy or fund this? Because our audience can't be everyone. We need to be clear about who our audience is. And so if we are clear about the people who have an interest and a values alignment in the work that we're doing, we can be clear about who would want to make the investments to make this work possible. So we're going to dig in a little bit about some of the options of revenue streams, kind of what it takes to be successful, what it looks like when you're not super successful in this area, and kind of thinking through what are the contingency options and structures you may want to build around, because there is very rarely an organization, unless it has a ginormous gazillion-dollar budget, who is doing all of these in a great way. The organizations that come to mind who are kicking it on all of these levels are like St. Jude. You've really got to have a large amount of scale to have a really successful annual giving, major gifts, corporate relations and foundations department, running federal grants, and have program service revenue. It's just not really within the operational scale of most organizations to be able to do that. So we start with annual giving. I'm an annual giving girl. It's the bread and butter. It's my favorite thing. And I love annual giving because to me, it's inviting the community in to be excited about your work and to invest in your work. And I believe in annual giving because annual donors are the people who never let you down. They are the people who are always in your corner. They are there because they feel connected to the organization. And it's a long-term bet because annual donors are most likely to become major donors and planned donors over time if you invest in that relationship with them. But it requires being extremely consistent and predictable. It's basically the equivalent, and we're at the beginning of the new year, so I have a lot of diet analogies because that's one thing I know how to talk about, having tried almost every single one that exists. But annual giving is really that equivalent of eating that same meal every evening. You know exactly what it is, you know exactly what the portion is, and you know exactly what the result will be. And that gets boring for some people. We struggle with consistency in many of our nonprofit organizations, and consistency here is the only thing that's going to deliver results. You also really need to have a leader who's going to be out front and it doesn't mind being out front over and over and over again. And I'm saying a leader. It doesn't have to be the executive director. It can be the development director. It can be the COO, however you want that, whoever you want to call that person, chief program officer even. But somebody who's willing to go talk to every Rotary Club and every Women's Club and every book club and really be out front engaging with the community and educating them, updating them, and inviting them into the organization's work exceedingly consistently and regularly. And so that's when you start to think like, oh gosh, I just went to this Rotary Club. Well, no, you were there a year ago, but you got to go back every year to stay top of mind for people. The other thing that can be hard about annual giving is that it takes at least 18 months, and that's probably on the early side, to really start to build momentum and to get a measurable result. Annual giving requires and is desperately reliant on almost more than any other revenue function on clean data, because you have to be able, if you're doing annual giving well, you need to be able to check who gave last year but hasn't given this year. How do we engage with those people and bring them back into the fold? Who are our monthly givers? Do we have people who are giving sort of regularly who might be willing to make a monthly gift? Do we have someone who's given $500 a year for 4 years and then out of the blue they give $1,500? Maybe we should connect with that person and see what's going on in their lives. But you've got to be able to rely on your data and have the time to look at your data and really understand what it means for your work and the work of the organization. And then finally, where we tend to underinvest in annual giving is that you really need a single person who owns stewardship, and that is their primary job. And often we try to say, well, the CEO is the chief fundraiser, and we don't have fundraising staff. But if you don't have fundraising staff, your CEO is responsible for 9 gazillion other tasks, and you're never going to get the full value out of annual giving because that person can't fully own stewardship on top of all of their other duties. Annual giving also tends to fail when we just expect it to take care of itself. Often quotes from organizations whose annual giving program isn't really killing it. They tend to say things like, our story just sells itself. Well, no, it doesn't. Like, you have to go out there and sell the story. It's the sizzle, not the steak. The steak doesn't sell itself. You've got to make it sizzle. When organizations rely on marketing, marketing is not fundraising. Marketing and communications are components of fundraising, but they are not the same thing, and they don't necessarily have the same purpose. And so expecting marketing to be all things to all people can prevent the message from getting to the right audience, and also dilute the message so that you're sending out stuff that is meaningless to everyone instead of intentionally reaching and engaging a specific audience. And then just expecting people to find you or always be with you. People will fall off without attention, and you don't know when that'll happen or what's going to set it into motion. But there are plenty of people out there trying to get new donors into their organizations, and you don't want to lose someone who's been reliable for you for years simply because you didn't have time to pick up the phone and check in with them once a year. So it's where we hit that real cap of understanding that one person, one fundraiser who is full-time can typically only manage 120 primary relationships. And there's science behind that. You can go look at the citations if you need that to take it back to your board or your staff to advocate for an investment in fundraising. But there is a realistic cap to that number and the number of relationships that people can successfully engage. Now, I'm not saying for every 120 donors you've got, you need a full-time fundraiser. But if you have a full-time fundraiser, they really can only manage 120 active relationships. Then we get into major gifts. So this is the thing that boards get excited about. They're like, major gifts are where we're going to put our time and effort, because for one major gift, we can get, for the work of one major gift, it will cover the cost of 100 annual gifts. I tend to disagree with that. I think major gifts are important, but I think they build on a successful annual giving program. However, you do not have to have a successful annual giving program to target major gifts. What you'll need is a small group of very high capacity, that means rich people, who are true believers in your work. They want to go out and get other people in their network and with their net worth to make big long-term bets and big programs. And so I'm saying this is kind of like the equivalent of you eat cereal and peanut butter and jelly and grilled cheese 6 days a week, but you get steak on the 7th day. So the 7th day is really exciting, but days 1 through 6 are a little boring and deprived. It's really best suited for organizations who have a leader and a board who have very deep relationships in the community. People don't usually give $10, $20, $50, $100,000 to someone they just met. So the person needs to have credibility. They need to be seen as being a change agent and someone who can make difficult things possible. Those major donors are going to expect to be consulted about the organization and its decisions. So you're also, when you transition into this major gifts focus, you're inviting a lot more opinions in. And so I think you need to have a clarity as to whether or not you're going to, how you're going to receive those opinions and ideas, because people who have the capacity to make $50,000 and $200,000 gifts are have a lifestyle typically where somebody is always taking their advice and their ideas and executing them on their behalf. So you're inviting people in who have that expectation that you will listen to them and execute on their behalf. And so you've got to be really careful in thinking about how you invite that influence in, how you manage those expectations, and how you ensure that the power dynamic remains healthy. Additionally, it takes a long time to secure a major gift. You can't just really walk into someone's house and be like, hey, I guess you were waiting for me to ask you for $50,000 today. You're going to have to probably have coffee with that person and then have lunch with that person and then invite them for a tour of your organization and then maybe go to an event with them. It's going to be a cultivation process where you build trust and learn about each other. Organizations can get confused at this juncture too, because what you consider a major gift in your organization may not be what your donor considers a major gift. You may consider $5,000 a major gift, but your donor has the capacity and the willingness to give $50,000. But if you're not investing in that relationship and understanding and asking them, what would be an impactful gift for you? What do you want to see come from this organization? You won't gain the full value of the donor. Additionally, you can overassume what a major gift is for someone. I recently had a friend meet with a development officer who asked the friend, the development officer asked the friend for $200. And my friend thought she was asking her for $200. And she said, absolutely, I would love to give $200. I'll sign that pledge form right now. Well, the development officer was asking for $200,000. And this is not a person who had that capacity. And so it was a weird, awkward moment for both of them in assumptions about numbers and what numbers means and capacity. And so it's just the importance of knowing your donors, knowing where they are. And when you get in those awkward situations, because the awkward situations are going to happen when you're talking about people and money, being able to laugh through them and make them as unawkward as possible, as fast as possible. And being able to find the joke in whatever situation happens so that you can continue to enjoy the relationship and move the relationship forward. Additionally, these big donors aren't going to want to talk to a program person and an administrative person and the CEO. They're going to expect their relationship to be managed by someone who is extremely senior in the organization and they have a direct contact to that person. This is where I really know an organization is not going to be able to knock it out with major gifts, because their board is going to start with, does anyone know Mackenzie Scott? Well, your chances of getting Mackenzie Scott to make an investment in your organization are pretty minimal. Your chances of getting Darla Moore to invest in your organization are probably pretty minimal. Better than Mackenzie, but not top notch. But there are people in your community who have the interest and the capacity who are waiting to be engaged. And so when we make assumption that we need to go off the big public name donors, and that they'll just give us the check and go away, we're setting ourselves up for failure. Major gifts really is about having a significant and impactful relationship with a person that builds and increases over time. It's very much like a marriage and a long-term marriage, where the honeymoon's over and you know where you leave the socks on the floor. You've got to really manage that relationship and keep it positive and forward moving, because these donors, again, typically have influence in large circles. And if something happens and they become dissatisfied or mad, they will often encourage other donors not to give. And so you can lose a lot of revenue really quickly from one dissatisfied donor. And so you cannot underestimate the significance of investing in the relationships and maintaining the relationships in a healthy way with major gifts. Foundation and corporate relations. Foundation and corporate relations, going for that corporate money, and for big foundation money too. It really works best when you've got a business case. How is your work aligned with their work? In this case, they're investing in outcomes. They're investing in things that solve problems for them. It's not coming from their feelings. Now, their feelings matter, but their feelings matter much less than their determination to get something of value in return for their investment. Those gifts are going to they're going to require clear alignment. You're going to have to be able to say in 2 sentences why this makes sense. Where are we running parallel? And it's also going to come with a lot of compliance. So they're going to expect to possibly get data from you. They're going to expect to get reporting from you. They're going to expect to have some degree of control typically in how you spend their money. And it gets complicated fast. And so I'm saying it's kind of like a macro diet because you've got to do all of the math and figure out all of the things. And you've got to have some degree of organizational complexity to be able to really manage foundation and corporate relations. Often it's almost like running a major gifts program through a corporation, right? Like, so you've got the intensity of the relationship required, but also the clarity and consistency of the programming and the outcomes. You're not going to convince corporate people to invest in your organization if the alignment is not clear. You're not going to change their mind. Like, they might give you $500 or $2,000 event sponsorship go away money, but you're not going to ever be able to get beyond the go away money. And you've still, again, got to invest in that stewardship. The number of foundation leaders I talk to who say we only hear from people when they want money from us it's not great. I was with a foundation, a CEO of a large corporate foundation in South Carolina recently, and she said, I have a really hard time sometimes making friends because usually people only approach me when they want my money. But if someone pursues a relationship with me enough to see me 3 times, I know they actually want to be my friend. And so these are not just people waiting for you to come and ask them for their money. They want to understand your business case, and they don't want to feel used or taken advantage of to access their resources. It needs to be, it needs to have some organic element to coming into place. You can't chase these people down at the gym. It's not nice. That's called stalking. So it tends to fail, though, because at some point, everybody on your board is going to say, Colonial gives everyone money. Blue Cross Blue Shield gives everyone money. BMW gives everyone money. Well, no, they don't. They have specific things that they are determined to invest in that will advance their work. With Blue Cross, their foundation is very focused on healthcare and health outcomes, but not all health outcomes. They have targeted focuses that they're trying to impact. With BMW, they're heavily focused on workforce development. And so you really need to have enough alignment to get in the door for them to even talk to you, but you need to have a deep understanding of their work more than they need to have a deep understanding of your work. And we often expect that relationship to take place in reverse. Additionally, this funding can be scary. It comes with a pretty good level of risk because it's often not renewable. Sometimes there's multi-year giving here, but not often, not as often as we would like. And the funding comes with a lot of rules, and you may not be able to make the adjustments that you can make with other giving cycles. With these, if you get halfway through a program and you figure out you need to turn right instead of left, you're going to have to get their permission to turn right, even if you know it's the best thing to do. And if they say no, we said you have to turn this way, they may ask for their money back or not fulfill the remainder of their gift. And so when you go into these relationships, that needs to be clear-eyed about what restrictions and liabilities come with accepting this money. Finally, we get to government grants, which is probably the reason we're talking about this today, because all of us got so comfortable with this government funding. And I say this as somebody who led an organization that was primarily federally funded. And you expect that money to be there. It's got bipartisan support. It seems obvious that these programs that have been in place for decades would continue. And it's pretty shocking when they don't continue or when they may not continue. And I think we have to be really intentional in our approach currently in thinking about how we rate the stability and the value of these federal funds and what costs come with them. Again, your program, like the corporate side, has to be aligned with the government goals. You've really got to have a tremendous amount of operational support in place, because they're going to be T's crossed and I's dotted when it comes to reimbursements and reporting. And it's basically like them getting to tell you what you can eat, when, and where, and you have to decide whether or not to eat it all. It's a high level of control that you're giving up. Again, it's not bad money. I've managed a lot of it. It's great when it works, but it doesn't work for everyone. And so this money is best suited for organizations that have really strong programs, but just as much incredibly strong operational systems. Your grants are almost scored entirely objectively, often by a random blind group that you will never meet or have a relationship with. It can take a long time, especially when you're getting a new government-funded program started, to get that first reimbursement. So you need to be able to float your expenses for at least 3 to 6 months, which can be challenging when you're looking at your bank account and you're like, well, we should have $80,000 in the bank and payroll's $30,000, but we only have $40,000 in the bank until this reimbursement drops. When the reimbursement drops, we're free and clear for a while. But until the reimbursement drops, we don't have money. So you have imaginary money, but you don't have real money necessarily. And it's important for your board to have the education about your funding sources and how they work so that they understand, looking at your financial statements, what your actual financial position is. It can be really hard for boards to understand, especially when they come from the corporate world, the intricacies of securing reimbursement on a grant, that the whole thing can be kicked back for a 1-cent mistake. And that can put you in the back of the line for processing, which can delay you another 3 weeks for reimbursement. And yet it still requires stewardship, because you're going to want to have a really positive relationship with your program officer so that that person will go to bat with you and for you. I recently worked on a federally funded project that was tragically eliminated by DOGE, but our great relationship with our program officer kept us running probably months longer than we would have, because we had her personal cell phone number and we could have conversations with her about how we needed to submit things and word things so that we got it right the first time. And that level of support and relationship is critical. And so again, I think it's really important when we think about the money that we're bringing into our organizations that we're also thinking concurrently about the operational burden it's going to take to get that money and make that money succeed. Finally, I want to talk about my favorite thing, which I think we tend to undervalue, underinvest in the nonprofit sector, is program service revenue. And so to succeed in generating program service revenue, you've really got to understand the value of your expertise and where that aligns with the market demand. You need to have a realistic understanding of the actual cost of the organization in delivering the program. And you have to have your sales goals align with that cost, and you have to have clarity on what you say no to. This is freedom right here, because you're figuring out what the market is open to, how much you want to do that thing, and how much it's going to make. Nonprofits tend to run into problems with program service revenue when they underestimate the actual cost of service delivery. And so they're not bringing in enough money from the service, whether it's selling training, direct services to clients, compliance, quality assurance, whatever it is that generates revenue for you. You've got to be clear about the complete cost and how you determine getting to that cost in a realistic function. We tend to sometimes overestimate our ability to serve and to generate that's not tied to our actual capacity to succeed in those goals. And that can be really disheartening for program staff. Program service revenue is best suited for organizations who have a strong delivery model. You want to have good systems in place so that you come across compelling and professional. You need some level of acceptance that everyone's not going to get the same exact service. So there may be a base level of services that everyone can receive or people receive at a minimal cost. And the sophistication of service increases with the money that people can spend on the system. I tend to like to think of this as those people offsetting cost for the people who maybe can't take the full cost, but that's an intentional choice you have to make in thinking about your modeling. Are your top 10% of clients going to pay a 10% premium to offset 10% of the cost for your bottom clients who can't afford that? You have a lot of creative opportunities to think about how that money comes in and in what streams and structures, but you need to make those decisions on purpose and with time and intent, in consultation with your board, in consultation with your program staff, and making sure that everyone's on the same page for moving forward. This is in a lot of ways like your annual giving program, because you need to have clean data, because you're going to go back and say, who paid for training last year? Who hasn't paid for training yet this year? Let's go back to those people and see if they want to reinvest. And you've got to have relationships with folks. Again, if people have a positive experience and a positive relationship with you, they're going to be a lot more likely to prioritize doing work with you and doing business with you over someone else who may cost less or have a slightly different service. The relationship matters tremendously. Where program service revenue fails is where exceptions get made. And so this is where a lot of times, especially organizations working directly with families struggle, is because they want to make exceptions for families. And you can make exception for families, but you need to have a clear process and procedure for that, how that happens. And it can't happen for every family. Sometimes executives and boards struggle with this idea of making money from services because they'll say, we're a nonprofit, we can't make money. Well, no, you can make money. And in fact, you must make money to stay in business. You've got to make money. It's not negotiable. And it's okay for people to pay to access what you have to offer. And then also getting program staff and boards comfortable with the idea that everyone may not get the same service. This can be a big hang-up because it feels inequitable. And you have to find ways to navigate access to service and access to care in a way that feels values aligned for your organization and your team. And know that if you are switching from a free service revenue model to a program service revenue model, it may be such a change in alignment. If you're not able to bring your staff along with you, you may face some turnover just because people have trouble adjusting to that idea. And you've got to have really clear goals, a clear model, commitment across the team that we're going to do this. Because if your program staff are mad about delivering fee-based services, they're going to bring that anger to their service and your program's not going to be as successful. So again, this takes a lot of clarity, but it comes with a lot of freedom because you're setting your own destination. You're determining how much you do, where, for how much, for whom, in a way that you don't always have the flexibility with some of the other methods of generating revenue. And then finally, it's time to get honest with yourself. So what's gonna actually be right for your organization? And these are the hard questions. Does our strategy match our actual behavioral capacity? If we say that our strategy is to have an annual giving program that generates 240 donors who give $500,000 a year, are we actually engaging with annual donors? Do we have a functional database? Do we have the capacity to process those gifts, to invest in those relationships? If our strategy doesn't match our behavior, we're not going in the right place. often this is where that we hit that question too about, we say this thing is important to us. We say diversifying our funding is important to us. Like every nonprofit says this, every board retreat, they say this. But when it actually comes down to it, is it really that important to you? Are you willing to make the cost investment? Are you willing to get the seed money to even build the structure to go into this method of generating revenue? And then finally, being really clear on what we need to fulfill our purpose, because this is where organizations lose the way, is when they start chasing money and they stop chasing their purpose. If you chase your purpose, the money with clarity will come. If you chase money, you're never going to have purpose and you will quickly fade from value. And we want to talk about what even is sustainability. This makes me so mad when we talk about sustainability because nothing's really sustainable, right? Like every business across America doesn't know what their revenue will be. Like we've got some reasonable projections, but there are very few guarantees for any organization or corporation about what money is going to come in the door. And so for nonprofits, we have the same level of uncertainty. We can make some good predictions and projections, but we're never going to be fully sustainable. We have to define sustainability in a way that actually has meaning. And so we have to determine what that means for us. For us, being sustainable is determining the narrow lane of work that we can actually accomplish. How will we pay for this work without chasing money, without losing our values, and being really intentional about putting the consistent time and effort into determining those things and maintaining the alignment between how you generate money and the work that you do. And that's where we start to come to a close. And I hope that this has given you a lot to think about, but primarily what I want you to think about is the significance of your work and the significance of the impact that you're having in communities across our state, and how critically important it is for you to be able to deliver the work that you're committed to providing, how many people are counting on you, and the tremendous value that you're providing. There are people who cannot wait to be part of the work that you're doing, and it's up to you to have the clarity to tell them what a significant commitment is, what a significant investment is, and how they become part of this brave new world that we want to see. We all want to be part of building something better for our future, for our community, for all of the people around us. And we're all waiting for opportunities to figure out achievable ways that we can do that. I know that many of you have an enormous amount of capacity and potential for fundraising at various scales, and it's up to you to figure out what's going to actually work, but something will work. So I encourage you to think about what surprised you today, what you might change as a result. And then if you want to chat, I love a good chat. So you've got my phone number. You can text me. You can email me. I'm happy to be in touch. And I think we have about 4 minutes for wrapping up.
Yeah, so we have a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will try to answer as many as we can at this time.
Oh, look at all these friends here. It's just so exciting.
All right, well, while we wait for any questions in the chat, I want to just say thank you again to Mary Dell for that informative presentation. I think that was super helpful and gave all of us quite a lot to think about as we move forward with our organizations. Someone did ask, what books or courses would you recommend that might help with fundraising? And then also for your info, if you could maybe put that back on the screen for a second.
Yeah. Here, I'll drop it in the chat. What books and info? I would recommend talking to people in your community who are doing a really good job. If you see somebody's work, it doesn't matter if their organization is aligned with yours or if it's for profit or not for profit. If you see people doing good work, call them and ask for advice. People love being asked for advice. It's like the greatest compliment in the world to have people think you're smart enough to help them. And I'm happy to share my slides as well. So I think the greatest thing we can do in that community building is look at the expertise already around us. And then there's a great fundraising community on LinkedIn. And that's a little easier to consume because it can hit you in those 30-second points where you have a second. I know a lot of us are overwhelmed with webinars and books and articles and amazing things like that already.
The access the PowerPoint or the recording, Tashina will be sending that out after following today's call, so you should be getting the recording and slides very soon. And then we have about 2 minutes left, so before we wrap up, I just want to share a reminder about the upcoming Health for All Summit. Our call for proposals and call for nominations are currently open, so if you have some great work you want to share about, or if you know someone that is very deserving of award, please feel free to nominate them. Early bird pricing does end on Friday, so we encourage you to take advantage of the discounted rate when it's available. And then if you would like to be added to our mailing list to receive Alliance newsletters, updates, announcements, and information on our upcoming events, or if your organization is interested in joining the Alliance, please visit our website, healthiersc.org, or reach out and connect with one of us in our team, and we'd be happy to talk. So again, thank you, Mary Dell, for this wonderful presentation, and thank you to everyone who attended. We are very honored to have this time with you today, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.